Hey everyone, Tyler Edwards here. Thanks for checking out this video. In this video, I want to do a little cinematography breakdown of a mini doc that I recently published that I shot for an eyewear company called Gators Eyewear. It's a little series of ambassador stories, and I'll leave a link up here. I really encourage you to check it out because it's a pretty crazy story. But in this video, I wanted to give you a little cinematography breakdown of just a couple of scenes in particular, and just kind of go over the lighting and all that kind of stuff. Now, if I were to sum up this mini doc in one word, it would be contrast. And I'll kind of explain as I go on what I mean by that with some of the different shots, but like visually and editing and all that kind of stuff, I really tried to use contrast as a theme. And I'll explain that here in a little bit. But with that being said, let's go ahead. I'm going to jump into a couple of these scenes. I don't want to make this video an hour long for both my sake and your sake. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And let's talk about the first scene here. So the first scene is kind of on this porch next to this little fire, this little meditation scene. I tried to make this like feel really zen and like really peaceful, but again, playing off the contrast. If you watch the doc, it's got this like real intense voiceover. So again, we're playing off that contrast. So there's kind of that contrast in the edit. Now, visually speaking, what did I do here? Well, over here on the right-hand side of the frame, you can see there's a fire there. And I've got this shot just kind of locked off on sticks, and I kind of did a digital zoom just kind of as an establishing shot. So we got that fireplace there on the right, and then what I did is I put an aputure 300X up in a light dome just to give, and I put it on the fire effect at the warmer color tone, and I used that as because the fireplace just itself, you can see like right at the bottom of the fireplace. That's pretty much where the light is coming from, but I wanted to kind of make it feel like that fireplace was giving off a lot more light. So I put the 300X on the fire effect, and that really helped give exposure on his shoulder and the side of his face, especially when I move the camera around and all that kind of stuff. So it really helped kind of bring that fire to life and make it feel like that fire was lighting the scene a lot more than it actually was. On the other side of the frame, I have an aputure 300D Mark II and another light dome, and I just had that at really low intensity. I think it was at like 1% or 3% or something ridiculously low. And the idea there was just kind of mimic maybe a little bit of moonlight, just to add a little bit of color contrast and just kind of give a little bit of exposure on his other shoulder, his left shoulder. And you can see that on this frame, the left shoulder on the left side of the frame. So we got that just to kind of give a little bit of exposure and a little bit of color contrast right there. And then as I kind of moved the camera around, I kind of shifted the lights a little bit, just kind of get them out of frame and all that kind of stuff. But that was kind of the lighting setup I used for this opening scene. All right, that being said, let's go ahead and move over to the next scene, which is the interview scene. And like, I'm going to use diagrams and all that kind of stuff. So if you want, you can screenshot the diagram or pause so you can get an idea of how the lighting setup is and all that kind of stuff, just so I can kind of keep flying through this. Okay, so here we have the interview shot, and this is the A cam right here. So the first thing that you do with any interview is, first of all, you get your camera angles. So I got camera A and camera B angle set up with the way I kind of wanted to have kind of most visually interesting. So I chose this living room setup right here, and I just kind of used it to kind of shoot into the L of the room, but just to have a little bit more of an inviting feel to it, and kind of an open and airy feeling to it. And this kind of plays off that theme of contrast once again, where this is a super intense story. If you watch the documentary, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a super intense story, a lot of conflict, and just a lot of intensity all around. So instead of making this like a really moody looking interview, I wanted to kind of play off that visual contrast to show like a really intense story, but someone that has kind of made it to the other side of that conflict. And now I try to play this off as kind of like a warm and inviting interview setup, if you will. So that's kind of the idea there. I wanted to make this feel really kind of, like I said, inviting and all that kind of good stuff. So did that. chose this angle that has, you know, just some depth and some kind of visual interest there in the background. Now, when I walked into this living room, it was set up beautifully as a living room for actual day-to-day life. But in a frame, and when you look through the viewfinder, it was just really busy. So ended up just kind of moving all the furniture around to make it a little bit more open feeling. And so as you can see, what I did here is instead of taking all the furniture completely out to make it look a lot cleaner and a lot emptier, I don't like doing that. I like to actually throw in furniture kind of in the background. So you can see I kind of cheated this couch in a little bit because I still want to make it feel like it is a living room. I don't want to make it look like we deliberately just took everything out of a room and there's just one chair in there, because that's not really how living rooms look. And I kind of wanted to make this look as kind of natural and realistic as possible. So that being said, we got the chair set up for the talent. We've got camera A set up, which is the Blackmagic Pocket 6K if you're interested. And then on the B cam, we had on the Ursa Mini Pro G2 attached to an Easy Rig, kind of as a floating cam. And that was just a really tight profile shot. And that was kind of shooting towards the upstage side of the talent. And behind the talent was a big window. So that would be kind of the motivation for that key light that we're going to talk about here in a second. Okay, now that we got the chair all set up where we want, the talent and camera angles all where we want, the next up is to start adding in the key light. And that's kind of my preferred, is to make sure that the talent is lit and then start painting with light beyond that. So what we did here is we added, we used 2 lights for the key light. We used the aputure 600D and an aputure Nova P300C. And the 600D had the Fresnel F10 on it, just so that I could get as much punch out of that light as possible, because I used a 6x6 Chimera frame, and it's a breakdown frame. I love it. I use it all the time. And in front of that, I had a 6x Magic Cloth, and Magic Cloth takes it cuts a lot of light, but it diffuses the light really nice and creates a really nice soft light. So I wanted to have as much exposure as possible punching through that Magic Cloth to kind of give a nice soft wrap around the talent's face. So that's all we did with the key light. Pretty simple, but really effective. Just blast that light through, and I didn't flag it or grid it or anything like that, because I wanted that light to kind of push as far back as possible into that living room, because the idea here is the idea is that daylight is kind of lighting the talent. So I didn't care about making sure I was flagging that off or gridding it or anything like that. And to me, I think that just looks really natural. So that being said, the next thing is I added just some negative fill with a little sound blanket. And that really is just kind of, there's a big room. This is a really big room. And I try to do as much as possible just to stop any bounce hitting the shadow side of his face. So I just added some negative fill right there to help. And I used just a sound blanket because it kind of doubled as negative fill and to help with sound, because it was a really big room and lots of reverb. I tried to minimize that as much as possible. So we got some negative fill up, and then you can actually see on the talent's face, on the shadow side of his face, he's got like a little bit of a scratch right there. Well, that's actually coming, and actually on the shoulder too, and that's actually coming from the camera right side, the shadow side. There's some windows that were really high up in the ceiling, so high that it wasn't practical with the equipment that I had, and unfortunately I couldn't do a location scout to be able to completely flag those windows off. But what I did is put up it was a 6x, I think it was a 6x or maybe 8x, basically a big flag, and we use that just to flag that light off as much as possible, just so that it didn't completely fill out the shadow side of his face. But there still was that window light coming in from above, and that kind of gave, conveniently, kind of gave a nice little scratch to the shadow side of his face. It kind of just gave a little bit more shape. So I actually wasn't very mad at how that turned out. So that's pretty much what we did with lighting the talent, controlling the light on the talent, and all that kind of good stuff. And then the last light that I added was another 600D Pro with some full CTS, and I used that to kind of create that kind of afternoon looking sun kind of coming in from the left side of the frame. And that also just really helps kind of motivate that key light, and it creates these really dramatic shadows, and it kind of gives this like this warm like afternoon kind of maybe kind of sun starting to set kind of feel, but the light's consistent the whole time, and it didn't change, which is really nice because it's controlled light. But I just really like how that light kind of hits some different objects and kind of creates these interesting shadows and all that kind of stuff. So I know I flew through that. Like I said, I've got the little diagram. You can screenshot it and kind of look at that while maybe if you watch the film. But that's the kind of the idea with the lighting there. I know I flew through that, but I'm trying to not make this video extremely long. I'm sure it's already really long. So, okay, so that's that. Let's move on to the next scene. All right, so this next scene right here, we have two. He is down kind of in this war room, if you will, or man cave, or whatever you want to call it. And this is still like a real intense part of the story. It's kind of a turning point of the story, but it's pretty intense. So I kind of want to still play off the intensity and the moodiness of the particular part of the story. But I still wanted to like throw in elements of hope and all that. And that's what I did with some of the light and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk about it. So speaking of hope and that light and all that stuff, what I did is I put a 600D Pro outside again, and again had full CTS in front of the light to kind of warm up that light, to kind of give the feeling of sunrise or something, like early morning or late evening or something like that. And then I used an Aputure Nova P300C just on the ground and just threw it into, I think it was a 4x bounce, and really just to give an exposure lift on his face. And I believe I set that at 4,500 Kelvin, if I remember correctly. And so the idea there, again, was to just to give a little bit of an exposure lift on his face, because otherwise it was pretty dark in there, so you really couldn't see that. All that was an exposure lift. And then I used cinematographer's best friend Haze to add some more volume to the shot and be able to get some more of that volumetric light. And that's pretty much all we did with this scene here. It's pretty simple, but just kind of used what we had available. It was a very kind of narrow room, so we didn't have a lot of, and it was a pretty small room, so we didn't have a lot of room to work with. How many times have I said room so far? But yeah, that's pretty much all we did there. So that is pretty much, I know I kind of flew through this, but I tried to kind of cover 3 different scenes in this video. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to talk about in this particular video. I hope you have found that helpful or useful or anything like that. I'm sure I forgot to mention something, and I'll leave it in the comments if so, or the description or something. But if you have any other questions about any of these setups, definitely let me know down in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer as best as I can. Other than that, I appreciate you watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Peace.